Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Regina Yao, and I'm the founder and president of the Pixel Project. And I'm moderating the 11th Google Hangout session of the fourth fall edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. So through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds towards the Celebrity Male Role Model Pixel Reveal campaign, which aims to raise $1 million to keep our work alive and kicking. So we'll be telling you a little bit more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, which has lots and lots of exclusive author goodies a little later in this session. And you can find out about the Pixel Project by visiting www.thepixelproject.net. Now you can go there to find out about how to help your friend or your family member if they're facing domestic violence or rape or sexual assault. You can, and there are loads of primers on different types of violence against women there. Now we have a very special guest today. We have a live discussion and Q&A session with the extremely talented and amazing horror and fantasy author Isaac Marion. Now Isaac grew up in the mossy depths of the Pacific Northwest, where he worked as a heating installer, a security guard, and a visitation supervisor for foster children before publishing his debut novel in 2010. Warm Bodies became a New York Times bestseller and inspired a major film adaptation. It has been translated into 25 languages, and the latest installment in the Warm Bodies world is The Burning World. And Isaac lives in Seattle with his cat Watson, writing fiction and music and taking pictures of everything. Now, Isaac has also generously donated an exclusive book bundle to the stash of author goodies we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels fundraising page. Isaac's bundle features one Warm Bodies paperback signed and personalized, one copy of The New Hunger, also paperback signed and personalized, one copy of The Burning World, the first edition, signed and personalized, some Warm Bodies bookmarks, and something very special, a copy of Anne's journal, which is unpublished, and there are only 3 people in the world besides Isaac who have a copy of the story. So you'll be number 4 if you make that donation. Now we'll tell you a little bit more about how to get there to make that donation a little later in this session. And by the way, we need your help because we've crossed the $4,000 fundraising milestone and are on our way to our $5,000 fundraising goal this fall. So please give generously to help us. All funds go towards our efforts to end violence against women. Now I am gonna hand it over to Isaac. Hi Isaac, welcome to the session today. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
You're gonna do a reading, yeah? And then we're gonna discuss women and girls in your books and toxic masculinity and the burning world and geek culture and all. So I'm gonna hand it over to you now to do your reading.
Okay, so I'm gonna do a reading from The New Hunger, which is the prequel novella, which kind of covers a pivotal moment in the early lives of Julie and Nora and R, but this passage is about Julie and Nora. It seemed like the most appropriate section to read for this event. So even though we're going to probably be talking more about Burning World, I wanted to jump back in time a little bit. So this section comes from near the end of the book, actually, but it's not a big spoiler. And basically, something terrible has happened to both of these girls recently and also throughout their lives. And I'm just going to read this little section that I feel is kind of appropriate to the topic of what we're here for today. So. The sky is a pale, dry blue, like it always is now, even on perfect, cloudless afternoons. Smog, dust, airborne radiation. Julie doesn't know what it is. But from old photos, she knows the blue was deeper once. Her father tells her it's just a trick of photography, but she doesn't believe him. She sees it in her dreams, even when they're nightmares. Julie has had many nightmares in her short life. She is 12, but she has seen death from more angles than her grandfather did in 40 years in military service. She will grow up quickly. She will harden in places she shouldn't and break apart in others. And she will bury both her parents before she's old enough to buy beer. But even now, she knows this is living. She won't object to it or call it unfair, even though it's very, very unfair. Life is only fair for the dead, who get what they want because they want nothing. Julie wants everything, no matter how much it costs, and this is why she will change the world. She watches the girl in the overpass shrinking into the distance. Their eyes meet across a river of cars. Just before the girl disappears, Julie drops something out the window. You're not dead. Nora watches the apparition move toward her on the street below. Golden hair, azure eyes, fair skin like the saints on her mother's candles, except those saints never had blood running down their chins. We're going to South Cascadia. The apparition is moving away now, getting smaller. You're not dead. You can come with us. Nora blinks and the apparition is gone. She's alone on a bridge overlooking miles of desolation. She stands there for a while, watching the apparition's truck disappear into the distance. The wind blows a beer can against her feet, bits of ash into her hair. What are we looking for? Addis demands. Good people. She stumbles down the overpass and onto the freeway, walks for a few minutes, then stops. There's something on the road. There are good people somewhere. Are you sure? The sun glints off bumpers and mirrors and off the foil wrappers of 30 small cubes scattered across the pavement. There's got to be one or two. She closes her eyes. She sucks in a deep breath. She gathers the cubes in a grocery bag and she starts walking. She walks until sunset. She sleeps in a car. She wakes up at sunrise and starts walking again. She thinks about the volleyball, its smooth white simplicity, bump, set, spike. One clear thought to keep aloft, nothing more. And now her volleyball is this: to become a good person, to make her brother proud of her, and to find a way to save him. So Nora Ainalem Green is walking. She is 16 years old, but now she is 17. Now she's 24. She is seeking a cure for the plague, the curse, the judgment. People may never agree on what to call it. She will search for years until she forgets this city and its horrors, until she forgets she ever had a family and begins to think of herself as something that sprouted unbidden and unwanted through the concrete of an empty parking lot. But even then, alone in the driest desert, she knows that a rain will fall. It may be a long time, but not forever. Nora knows better than most that nothing lasts forever. Life doesn't, love doesn't, hope doesn't. So why would death or hate or despair? Nothing is permanent, not even the end of the world. So that's the end of that.
Okay, that's great. I'm just gonna put myself on the screen right now for a little bit. Okay, everybody, thank you. If you've just joined us, thank you so much for joining us. Now, if you have any, welcome to the session with Isaac Marion. If you have any questions for Isaac, please type them into the live chat box next to the screen. And today's chat box moderator, Samantha, will relay them to me, and I will ask Isaac your questions in between the discussion that we're going to have about women and girls in Isaac's books and the wider horror fantasy genre. And so please ask lots of questions. Here's your chance to ask Isaac questions, and he will answer them live. Now, I'm putting Isaac back on screen. Thank you so much for that reading, Isaac.
Thank you.
Everybody say hi. Say hi, everybody.
Type hi.
Yeah. So, so in your latest book, The Burning World, we continue following the adventures of R. But in some ways, Julie and Nora are the ones at the heart of the story. So Julie remains as kick-ass as she ever was, and Nora really comes into her own as they face down the Axiom Corporation and they try to survive. Now, to many people, a female protagonist should adhere to feminine stereotypes and expectations, no matter how quote-unquote strong they are supposed to be. In other words, they should be quote-unquote likable. So do you get any flack for not portraying Julie and Nora as unwaveringly feminine, good, and uplifting?
Yeah, I have gotten a little bit. I mean, not as much as I might as another book or another work of fiction might, I think, because so much of the readership for these books is female for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. But even from that side of things, particularly because, you know, at least started as kind of a romance, and the relationship between R and Julie was kind of central to that. And especially in the movie, there's kind of like, nobody wants to see anyone be mean to R because he's lovable and he's, you know, kind of, he's the protagonist at that point, at least. And so even though like in the first book, Julie was fairly crass and like certainly not a delicate flower, she's, you know, isn't actively antagonistic to what's going on. Whereas in the birding world, she actually kind of crosses that line in some places where it's like, oh wow, she's kind of the villain almost at certain points, and like you're not really sure what's going on between them. So yeah, I've gotten some comments like from women who were, you know, I hate Julie, she's not she's mean to R, she doesn't, you know, doesn't understand what he's going through, or like she's crazy or something. And so like that's been interesting and not unexpected, because like you said, there are certain expectations that female characters, especially like the protagonists or, you know, co-protagonists, are not supposed to be morally ambiguous. They're supposed to be, they can be cool and badass, but it's rare that they get to kind of have that moral complexity, let alone have a conflicted relationship with the romantic lead. So yeah, I have gotten some of that, just, you know, in casual comments from people. I haven't like been called out for it or anything in any formal way, because I think when people think about it more, they realize that it's actually, you know, intentional. It's not like I'm writing someone I think is great and they disagree. She's supposed to be complex that way. So, but yeah, I mean, that was something that crossed my mind as I was writing certain scenes, which I can't really refer to without a big spoiler. But that's kind of what makes it interesting to me, is getting the chance with these future books to like have it be more than just, you know, the two romantic leads against the world. It's now like kind of them against each other and their own demons. So that's kind of what made it exciting to me.
Yeah, and it makes it very real now. Real though. I mean, to have a relationship with conflict, like not every, like just about every relationship has a conflict. Nobody just like goes happily ever after. That's, you know, that there will always be arguments, disagreements, and the thing with Julie being more quote unquote unlikable now, because I don't see her as unlikable. I see her as very human. Yeah. I do, and you know, is that she really does, you know, like you say, cross the line. You know, after, guys, spoilers ahead. I'm just gonna say this now, spoilers ahead. This interview,
at least one major review already spoiled this whole thing, so you know. Yeah.
This session is gonna be full of spoilers if you haven't read The Burning World yet. But
you haven't. I mean, 7 months ago. What are you waiting for?
Yeah, so just a tip, she does tip over into sort of villainy when she finds her mother, when she realizes her mother has become a zombie and she must rescue her mother, and that's when she does tip into villainy. But you know what, it's, you know, this discussion puts me in mind of the discussion I've had a few weeks ago with Ilona Andrews, and Ilona actually pointed out that I don't know if you'd agree with this. She said that, you know, the male protagonist can, she said basically, and I'm paraphrasing her, the male protagonist can do anything he wants. He can be bad, he can do things that are not very nice, and the reader is always happy to forgive him. But if a female character does it, it's a whole different kettle of fish, she said. It's like people don't like it because apparently female characters need to be likable all the time. Do you find that at all?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I've definitely noticed that in just the way that most stories are told. It's rare that is allowed. And I think like there's just a lot. There's a thinner tightrope that female characters are supposed to walk with it. They're like they've been gradually given more permission to be slightly more complex than they were like 50 years ago, and now, like, you know, they can be strong in one sense, or they can be, you know, cool or whatever, and not necessarily like perfect, but there's still kind of a more limited range of what's acceptable. And that, I think in some ways it may be because of that long tradition of narrow margins in fiction that people have in their minds, like, there's one of two things that a female character can be. She can either be sweet and beautiful, or like a cool, tough heroine, but she can't, there's no other category. So as you're experiencing the story, it's like, well, wait, if she did this, she's not sweet, and she's also, I don't think she's the cool heroine, so then she must just be, you know, I just don't like her. You just assume that the author unintentionally made them unlikable, and it's like, well, they shouldn't have written her that way. And it's like the ability to just let their character unfold in a way that is not burdened by one of those two expectations isn't really common yet. I mean, it certainly exists, but it's not ingrained in pop culture yet. So like subconsciously, you're looking for which category to put her into, and if it falls outside of that, people are like, I don't know what's going on, and I'm confused and angry.
It's like cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. I think people, like, it's a lot of it is subconscious, because there's that long tradition of like what a female character is in fiction, especially like genre fiction, where it's even more defined by cliches and tropes. A lot of times you're not used to seeing like ambiguity in how you're supposed to view the character. And if you're not really sure, even just for a moment, like, Julie doesn't actually become the villain of this series. Like you know, she swings to the light and to the dark throughout the story, but like even those brief moments where you're kind of on edge about how to feel about her, some people, that was too much for some people. So yeah, it's pretty fascinating and horrible.
Yeah, I mean on the movie side, I mean, we've literally this year seen, like, you know, Robin Wright. She goes from Princess Buttercup to General Antiope, and hopefully that transition will. But that took what? Princess Bride came out, what, 30 years ago? Was it 30 years? It took so many decades. So hopefully there'll be, you know, the changes will come in for genre fiction. But, you know, it's nice, if that's the operative word, it's actually nice to read a complex female character, because one would think that reading a complex female character that had flaws would, you know, as a female reader, that you would feel a little bit more empathy, but I think you're right. People have to sort of reconsider the boxes that they try to put female characters into when they read books. There's actually a related question from the audience. Laurie Heckler. Hi, Laurie. Laurie says, Isaac, what has been the hardest part of writing a female lead character?
Well, I mean, there's always that question just kind of in the back of like wondering if I'm unknowingly getting it wrong. I mean, because R is still the first person character. The story is kind of weird, and then it jumps around in POV a lot. But so like there were, the New Hunger has those two characters in third person, but it doesn't really get quite as deep. They're very young, and it's easier to write children than a mature adult woman. So yeah, with Burning World and the last book, even more so, where it gets even more deep into Nora and Julie's lives. I don't think, I generally believe in the idea that like men and women are not opposed alien species. I think they're both human, and there aren't like massive differences in how they experience the world, at least life itself. Certainly there's differences in how they experience society, but as far as like cognitively, psychologically, I think there's plenty that we have in common. And I've generally heard advice from women, from female writers, to not overthink it too much, to you know, would a woman think this or think that, like, unless that's, you know, the entire story is about female psychology or something, which I probably wouldn't write, then you should just kind of proceed with the character as a human being. But at the same time, you know, there are some things, there's some subtleties that are certainly different. And for me, I mean, it's not a huge stretch. I mean, I have many female friends, most probably more than guys really, and hang out with women a lot. So it's you know, I have plenty of material to draw from, but there's still just kind of, I think when you're a guy writing a female character, even if she's not the main protagonist of the story, there's just an extra level of scrutiny from the reader that is sort of always in the back of my mind, like, I wonder if anyone is going to read this and think like, what an idiot, or even worse, what an asshole. So yeah, I mean, it's a little nerve-wracking when I think anytime you explore a perspective that's not your own, there's the fear of like being inauthentic or accidentally being, you know, feeding into a cliche or stereotype or something. But that's really mostly it. I think I want to capture it as honestly as I can, but you know, you can never really know for sure, which is, you know, it's great to talk to you and to hear feedback like this, because then it's like, okay, maybe I didn't screw it up too badly. So it's relief.
Yeah. Okay, guys, so Laurie has had a question answered. If any of you, and I see that there are several of you there, have any questions, please drop them into the live chat box next to the screen. Our chat box moderator, Samantha, is there, and she will relay your questions to me, and I will ask Isaac for you. So get busy with your questions. So in the meantime, let's head on to the next major question here is, you know, The Burning World is a darker, grittier book than Warm Bodies, and this is reflected in the way Julie and Nora have developed as characters. They're now complex, flawed, and harsh, and yet their friendship endures through all the horrors. So what are the challenges of developing Julie and Nora's friendship in The Burning World, and why do you think positive takes on female friendship is still not very common in the horror genre or even the fantasy genre?
Well, I think as to why it's not common, I would guess probably just because there usually aren't very many female characters. Like, it's fairly rare to have, you know, if it's especially like fantasy kind of scenario, if you have like a questing party or something, there's usually kind of like one token female, and then, you know, for there to be two, they're generally, you know, going to be rivals or something like that. And so I guess it's just not that common that you see a friendship, like a pre-existing friendship in genre stories, because usually every character is kind of thrown together into the mix and they have to hash out their conflicts and everything. But you know, that's a kind of a tropey approach to that genre. But for me, I mean, the challenge of writing that is, I guess, because it's most of that friendship has happened off screen, so to speak, before the story began, just to kind of make it feel lived in, to kind of have a sense of real history there that you never actually see, because even though The New Hunger is a prequel and you see them meet for the first time, they don't really meet. They kind of have this brief encounter, but then their actual relationship doesn't start till a point in the future that we don't see. So to me, that, like, it's one of my favorite parts about this little gang of characters is that friendship, because it I could kind of sense it in my mind even before I got a chance to like actually write about it. There's just kind of this easy rapport between them. they know each other's weaknesses, and they give each other shit. They hassle each other, but they have inside jokes, and like they know, they've been through a lot together and separately. So getting to write that, and it's kind of one of the few little oases of warmth in the story, where everyone else is in so much conflict all the time, and R is very tormented in his own past and everything. But then you have, like, even though both of those girls are very tormented in their own ways, their relationship together is kind of this little cocoon where they don't really, they have some issues with the way they go about some of these actions. And Nora is kind of the voice of reason when Julie is flying off the handle, but it's mostly kind of a warm thing. So it's kind of refreshing to dive into that. And I've, like I said, I have a lot of female friends, and I get to kind of hang out and watch these friendships evolve. And I've lived in houses where, I was the only guy with, 6 girls that were all great friends from way back in the day. So I've seen kind of this special rapport, this kind of irreverent banter that they have, and kind of got to absorb that. So I wouldn't say it was challenging. It's just, it's a pleasure to write that. I think it's, the only challenge is like finding places in the story to let it show, to let it breathe, when there's so much, action and mayhem going on, to get those little human moments. And there's a lot more of them. Unfortunately, the last book, The Living, has most of my favorite moments from this story, particularly about the stuff that we're talking about, like those 2 characters and their relationships, and kind of their arc has most of the big payoffs in The Living, which no one gets to read yet due to publishing complications. So I keep wanting to reference that, but unfortunately I have to sit on that for a while longer. But I've really enjoyed writing both those characters, and when they get to combine in meaningful ways, it's even more fun.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing about how rare female friendship is in fantasy and horror and science fiction is that, the only other author that we've actually could have a discussion about female friendship with in their books is Susan Dennard. And Susan Dennard writes the Wind Witch series. And in that book, like in your book, I mean, it's very different. It's epic fantasy, bordering on epic fantasy. But that the female friendship, a positive female friendship of two major characters are in the forefront. They drive the story, just like Julie and Nora's friendship in a way drives the story. And it's really, really refreshing. But yeah, it is. We've interviewed and we've chatted with more than 70 authors in the last 3 years. And yeah, you're the second author with female friendship at the core of their book.
Because like on just a technical level, I think there's a certain economy, of a character economy, that is going on, especially in stories where there's like they're on an adventure or something, and generally like the focus is on the protagonist, and the protagonist will have like a best friend, and they have some banter and they play off each other, but like it's fairly uncommon to have like other characters have friends. Usually they're all there to like support the protagonist in some way. And I think one of the things that has allowed me to bypass that in this story is that the protagonist is extremely passive for the most part. Like he's really only the protagonist because it's written through his eyes, but like he rarely is doing things. Mostly he's observing. He's kind of like an observer of humanity. And so as far as the action, more of the protagonist, and that she does more things. And so Nora is her friend, and you get to have this dual protagonist situation where I can allow that to unfold without without crowding the stage with too much immaterial stuff. So it's it's interesting to kind of look at it from a structural point of view and see why that happens sometimes. And of course, since so many protagonists are male, that often leads to the friendship being male as well, which is a
Yeah.
whole other issue.
Oh yeah, there are plenty of romances everywhere, but not that many
Yeah.
in genre fiction, but not that many female
Yeah. What
friendships.
is
Now,
the female equivalent of romance? Just a friendship. I never heard a female term that parallels that.
yeah, it's weird, isn't it? It's like, you know, the moment we apply to male friendship that's close and human and, you know, not just slapping each other on the back, it's like bromance. And I'm like, that might be so weird. I mean, friendship is friendship, right? Like, if you're going to be
Yeah, I don't know why they needed a new word for that.
yeah. So, you know, let's talk about Sprout. Because Sprout's really cool. So, you know, I mean, to me at least, Sprout is reminiscent of Newt in the Alien movies in certain ways. So, you know, her courage, her initiative, and having a mind of her own despite her young age. So, why did you decide to include Sprout as a little girl in the story? And what steps did you take to sidestep the whole children in peril trope that normally surfaces when children, especially girls, appear in horror and dystopian stories?
Well, I mean, as far as why she's a little girl, it's, you know, because she's Abram's daughter, and she's kind of his, you know, connection to the story, his reason to care what's going on. So, you know, I'm not sure if you were asking like why she's young as opposed to like an adult character, but you know, there's actually a lot of children in this story, which is kind of odd when I think about it. But like almost everybody has a few children that are involved in their arc, and you know, she's like, Abram is kind of this more traditional man. He's kind of like backwards. He was raised by the Axiom group, which is extremely backward organization that is kind of like trying to go back to the old ways. And so even though he was initially brought up in a more progressive, I guess, family, he spent most of his life in this company. And so a lot of his ideas are, you know, not progressive. He basically views his role is just to, you know, protect his family and you know, his daughter's his property, and is kind of that type of guy. And Sprout is kind of an anomaly in that, you know, that's all she's known too, but she's still young enough to kind of like, she hasn't completely absorbed that programming. So she's like a little bit of a wild card, and kind of has the ability to surprise him with, you know, desires of her own, even though she's a child. So yeah, I mean, as far as her function in the story is complicated, I guess. But the children in peril thing, like I certainly didn't introduce the kids as something to save. Like there are a few moments where they're in peril, but they're brief and not really like major motivators in the story. Their role is really more as kind of like a representation of, you know, what is going to come after this conflict is over. And so all of the kids, which Sprout is kind of the oldest and most expressive of them, because two of them are half zombies and one of them is still, you know, trying to decide what he is. So they're all kind of like they're the next generation of what is going to come next, and they're kind of a preview of what that might look like in a world where a lot of things have changed, and kind of there's sort of a new way of living and thinking about things. So I didn't add them to the story as plot movers. They're not there to be rescued and you know, be in peril. So that didn't really even cross my mind writing it. It was more like they are much more meaningful than that. They're kind of like, in a sense, like what the story, what it's all for, like what they're all fighting for. Even though a lot of these people, don't expect to experience a new world during their own lifetimes, they're kind of looking at these kids and thinking like, what about them? Like we gotta try for their sake. So yeah, it's just a different kind of story. Like it's not really a horror story. It's not. There are some terrifying moments, but it's not about being chased by monsters so much as it is like they're in just a generally dangerous world, but it's sort of the backdrop for this more personal and societal conflict that they're involved in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, because that's what's interesting about Warm Bodies. You use, zombies are traditionally horror. It's a traditionally a character from the horror world. It comes with its own tropes and stuff. But what's interesting is that you subverted the whole zombie thing. And I'm going to tell you one thing. I'm not a fan of zombies. I am not. And I found out about you when I wanted to watch a movie, and I was wondering what was on. So I went to the movie theater, and Warm Bodies was there. And I actually asked, and it looks interesting. And I asked, the girl at the movie theater at the counter and said, is it horror? And she started laughing. And she says, oh, you just wait and see. And I did. And I loved it. And I read your books from there on. And that's interesting because a lot of times when we read zombie books, it's always about who can the authors always try to gross you out. But your books don't. They actually examine how the world is. If a version of how the world could be if it was overrun by zombies. But it is not. It has the horror motif, but it's not horror. So when I try to explain your books to someone who hasn't read your books, I have to say all this. And they have to actually read it to believe it. Yeah.
That's why it's been such a nightmare for me to promote all these books, because it has the premise has so much cultural baggage attached to it, and it's kind of like I put something in a container that it doesn't really belong in, and no one really associates that container with that content. So trying to just explain to people what these books are about and why they might like them has been very challenging for that exact reason, because like people just automatically, they think they know what zombie fiction is and what it isn't, and I'm kind of like, well, yeah, there are zombies, but it's really not. It's not that at all. It's not that formula. But it's hard to explain that without them just reading it or seeing it, for that matter.
Yeah. So there are some pretty brutal scenes of violence against female characters, such as Axiom's torture Julie, and Nora almost got murdered. So in fact, pretty much all horror or horror-influenced stories or dark fantasy stories feature some sort of violence, and sometimes violence against women. So how do you, as an author, find a balance between showing violence as an integral part of the story in the world? Because and Julie and Nora, they are basically in a dystopia, yeah? And not showing violence gratuitously. How do you strike that balance?
Well, it happens in these stories. I generally base how graphic it's going to be is based on how important it is to what's happening in the story. I don't have like just a big battle scene where I describe a bunch of wounds for no reason or something. Like when there is actually visible violence, it's because something meaningful is happening related to that. So like, I guess I try not to use it as like a gimmick or as a cheap shortcut to emotional investment. Like in that torture scene, for instance, like and Julie are both being tortured. It's not just like him trying to save his girl from torture. You know, like they're in it together, and you know, she is even kind of setting him straight as far as his role in protecting her, because, you know, in the first book, his whole catchphrase is kind of keep you safe, and she's getting kind of tired of it, and the over reliance on that role. So, you know, there's violence against really everyone in this story, and sometimes it's women, sometimes it's not, but it's just the nature of the world they live in, I guess. Like, I don't, when it's graphic, I've been told like that it's graphic in kind of a poetic way. It's not just like fountains of blood and meat. It's like kind of mournful violence, like you know, is either seeing it or doing it, but it's not meant to be titillating. It's not like, oh, cool, like just rip that guy's brain out or something. It's like, oh, this is tragic, or like, you know. So I guess that's what not being gratuitous is to me, is the violence itself is not the point. It's not like, that's, you know, in any given moment in a story, there on some level, like, you want the reader to get something, whether it's information or emotion or, you know, a thrill of some kind. There's something you're trying to communicate to the reader, or something you want them to feel. And I think gratuitous violence would be where I write a whole scene so that they can feel the thrill of violence. And that's what I want them to get out of it, is like, oh, they just blasted that guy's head off, something. I don't think I really do that in this series. It's generally the opposite, where it's like,
no, you actually write violent scenes that serve the story and shows character. And, you know, the reason why we ask that question is because, you know, if you're looking at a more typical zombie book, or a more typical horror book, that, you know, it's always the woman who dies first.
Yeah.
You know, the trope is, you know, it's always, you know, the first victim is always a woman, which is gets kind of tiring, and the whole gross out thing.
Bridging. You heard the term bridging?
Nope.
I think it's a comic book reference, but yeah, like the whole idea of the woman character or the love interest being killed purely as a, you know, a motivator for revenge or something. Yeah, it's pretty tiresome to me.
Oh yeah, I think some of us call it fridging or something like that.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Yeah.
It's from a comic book where his girlfriend was chopped up and put in a fridge, apparently. And somehow that became the reference point for that whole trope. But yeah.
Yeah. Oh, we have a question from the audience about this as well. Well, sort of related to this. So CC Ray says, given the harrowing pasts of the characters and the general commentary on humanity in the books, are there any scenes from the books that were especially emotional or difficult to write?
Well, yes, I can answer that in the affirmative. I'm trying to think of which ones I might single out. Again, it's tough because so many of them are in the next book. But as far as what's happened so far, I mean, the whole thing with Julie and her mom was pretty rough. Like that, you know, you've already spoiled it, so I don't mind talking about that. But having that relationship, you know, has been brewing since Warm Bodies. I mean, it's mentioned over and over how her mother left her at that age, and you can tell like it's a deep-seated trauma and that she's still not really past, even though it was many years ago. And then having this situation where just absolutely unthinkable happens, where suddenly her mother's back, but apparently unsavable, is a pretty tragic situation. And trying to like write that moment and give it the weight that it needed to really just convey like how horrific that is, which is sort of why that's the moment where Julie kind of snaps and loses her tether on her goals and her ethics, and to some extent. That was, you know, there's some pretty deep grief moments in this story for Julie, and then there's more like that for Nora in the next book, and of course for R throughout, pretty much revisiting all of R's past was particularly emotional for me, because in a lot of ways it mirrors my own in some ways, definitely like pulled from my own life experiences. And so writing some of that stuff and just like kind of putting myself back into that state of mind, exaggerated somewhat, but not as much as you might think. Yeah, there's a lot of grief and tragedy in that story, and some of it happened in the past, but the way that I'm working with time in the story, it's not really like it's all interwoven. Past keeps coming back into the story, so I don't know if I could pick out a single one. I think, you know, the scene towards the end of The Burning World, which is kind of the conclusion of R's flashbacks, like the final moments of his life and leading up to that, are pretty grim, and you know, have to go to some pretty dark places to write them, but so hard to choose from so many miserable moments.
All right. Well, you know, in certain ways, your treatment of the main male characters in The Burning World continues and expands on what Warm Bodies did, which is to reverse the typical horror trope of evil non-human monsters versus the male human hero. But M and R, Marcus, I suppose we should call him Marcus now. Marcus and R display a lot more compassion and humanity in contrast to Abram, who behaves more like an anti-hero, even though he's human and a dad. So did this develop organically, or was this a deliberate move to not only upend this particular genre trope, but also explore masculinity and what is acceptable male behavior?
Yeah, that was definitely intentional. I mean, there's a pretty big range of masculinity in this story, from, you know, the far extreme is Axiom itself, and, you know, the people running it, which are kind of like the quintessential old school horrible masculinity. And
yeah, Axiom seems like, you know, uber patriarchy. Yeah,
and you know, it's kind of personified by, you know, the Mr. Advist, who is kind of maybe if there is a main villain of the story, it would be him. Which, you know, I didn't want to take it so far into being just fully cartoonish. I think that, you know, at the time that I was writing it, I thought maybe I was more in danger of that. But now, like, we're basically have that as our president in the US, and it's now not seeming very cartoonish at all. I mean, it is cartoonish, but it's also reality, in that we have kind of the embodiment of just about every toxic concept that's been around in our culture is sitting in the White House. So, you know, there's that far extreme where there's like this organization where their stated purpose is to basically bring back the good old days, which, you know, I wrote this before the Trump campaign, but Make America Great Again, it fits very nicely into their agenda, which is like, you know, everything, there's disorder, there's chaos, things are confusing and unpredictable. So we have to like bring it back to how it was when there was societal order and structure, and people knew their place, and you know, everything was contained. And, you know, they try to pitch it as a positive effort, but you can read between the lines of what that means. So there's that. And then, you know, Abram is a product of that, quite literally, because he was literally raised by this company. I mean, it's kind of this strange like foster care company where you know, they get wayward youths and raise them within, you know, on the company campus basically, and so they train them quite brutally to follow these concepts. And then, you know, there's like M, who is kind of a more normal guy, but, you know, is not exactly Mr. Sensitive, which R is. And so like there's a lot of different shadings of that, of what masculinity can be in the story. And there's a lot of, you know, travel between, because in R's past, he was also part of that culture of all that, without, you know, giving away too much. Like he, you know, went through that himself and then kind of had a reversal and tried to come back to the other side. So that's definitely a big element in the series as a whole, one of the major themes. And starting from the point of, you know, like, what is masculinity and what should it be and what can it be, but then expanding beyond that into like the bigger implications of it, of just like, what is, you know, what should people's relationship to each other and to the world be, out even bigger than just, you know, gender relationships or something. It kind of starts there and then goes wider.
Yeah, you know, do you think that genre stories in science fiction, fantasy, and horror like yours can help move conversations about toxic masculinity and misogyny forward in a constructive way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the strengths, one of the like features of genre stuff is that it kind of is a way of disguising real issues in a way that makes them easier to swallow for some people. I think, like, when I initially writing Warm Bodies, one of the reasons that I decided to use zombies as the vehicle for that story was that I didn't, you know, I wanted to write about that sort of feeling of being detached from life and essentially, you know, deep depression, from a point of view that would be, you know, not just so literal as just like a, you know, didactic kind of thesis on depression or on you know, finding meaning in life or something. So using this what most people would think of as a lighthearted trope, a lighthearted premise to explore those heavier things is kind of a way of sneaking it in. And I think genre stuff in general, like, it often doesn't try to do that, but the best genre stuff is doing that. I think that the best of it, stuff we remember and talk about, is stuff that does have an idea, like a meaningful, real thing that matters, and then weaves it into a more fantastical story. And the benefit of that fantasy is that it kind of gets under your skin, instead of just like walking up to someone and saying, here's how you should live, or here's how you should think, which puts up people's defenses, and they're like, well, no, I don't believe that. And you know, it activates all your like cultural programming, you know, well, my dad said I should live this way, so you're wrong. And if you're just coming at it direct like that, you have a lot more resistance. And I think, you know, you can see it a lot of times, like, you look at the comment sections on, you know, a video, a trailer, or like a discussion about a genre story, and there'll be people saying like, oh, I think this is about this, and like, here's what I think this represents or something. And there's always like a bunch of people saying, guys, it's just a movie, or like, it's just you know, it's just a cartoon, it's, you know, it's about aliens. None of that stuff's you're reaching here. But that's kind of the deception of it, is that people think it's just about aliens or whatever. They think it's about zombies, but even so, the ideas are getting in subconsciously. So I think genre is like a tool of bypassing defenses and allowing you to kind of communicate an idea like under the surface in a way that just goes directly to their subconscious, I think, which makes it almost sound like I'm, you know, mind control or something, but it's, you know, positive brainwashing.
Well, you know, it's one of the storytelling is so important, and you know, it is one of the reasons why we have the Read for Pixels campaign, because we, you know, the Pixel Project as an organization, we don't preach, We don't want to preach, we want to, however the message can get through, it will get through. And, Joe Hill, who we've had as a guest, said, storytelling is so important. It's the way history and culture gets transmitted. So, you expanded on what he said just now when you explained it.
And I think it's ideally it's in combination with something like your organization, because you can't have everything be subliminal. Like, there needs to be actual information and actual causes doing things directly. But if it was just fiction and people had to they get the idea subliminally, but then they don't have anywhere else to go, it would kind of be a dead end. So you need both. You need somebody doing real organizations that have information and education, but then fiction can kind of plant the seed subliminally that gets people interested in the first place, and then gets them to contact someone like you and find out more about the issue. So I think the project is perfect because you're combining the two.
Yeah, we've been called a first step, a first step organization. First step because when people get interested in a cause and they want to do something about it, that's the really crucial period where it's such a huge issue, violence against women. So we actually help them with baby steps. Okay, so you want to help, so here are some of the ways you can help. So maybe someone who's watching this right now, this session right now, might think, oh, I want to go help. So they can go to our website. There's so many things they can do, like make a donation, volunteer, ask us if we know what the nearest domestic violence organization is in their area. We can help with all of that, as long as we can help them take action. Now, we're going into, I'm going to put myself on the screen. Guys, we're going into the final sort of cluster of the discussion, and we're going to be probably wrapping up in about 15 minutes. So if you have any questions for Isaac, please stick them in the live chat box, and Samantha, who is today's chat box moderator, will send them along to me, and I will read them out to Isaac to answer before he goes off. Now, let's head into the final leg of this discussion. Now, in your opinion, how can authors, we're still talking about storytelling here. So how can authors strike a balance in their storytelling between raising awareness about sexism and gender-based violence and telling an engaging story without being pedantic or preachy?
Well, I don't know if there's a specific answer to that. That's certainly one of the biggest concerns when doing something like this, is to find that balance. I think it's just instinctive. Like, when you're writing the story, there's kind of a line where you can tell, some people go more subtly than others. Like, there are some stories where it's entirely subtext and you have to really look closely to figure out what they're trying to say. And then there are others, like in my case, it's a bit more overt, but it's still it's not like I don't want a moment where the action stops for them to have a discussion about social issues or something. Like, it has to be woven into the story and flow naturally from what is happening with these characters. So yeah, I guess it's just being conscious of realism in that sense, and being aware that there's the message, it's a story. You're not writing a treatise on the subject. Like, it has to, the priority has to remain in focus, which is these people are living their lives and having their struggles, and as long as you keep that in sight, I think it'll naturally work itself out when you're being aware of that. This is just an issue of tone, I guess, of being able to tell when it's too on the nose.
Yeah. So, geek culture in general, or at least in certain parts of it, has had its share of critics, saying that it's still too male-dominated, despite a rising number of prominent, well-respected and well-known female creators, whether they're authors or game designers or comic book writers. So what do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole whether it's comics or gaming or books, more welcoming for women and girls?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Like, I don't have the statistics, but I know that that was very much true, like even 10 years ago or something, as far as the demographics. It seems like it's definitely shifted a bit, at least in the audiences. I don't know, I'm sure there's studies, and I would imagine it's still somewhat skewed, but it does seem to be naturally shifting towards more equality in at least in the audiences. I don't really know. Like, it does seem likely that the people creating the content do seem to still be largely male, but I mean, I guess as far as what needs to change, I think it's just kind of all this stuff that we're talking about here. I mean, more people being turned on to that way of thinking, being aware of like, I think sometimes there's probably malicious intent, but I think a lot of times this stuff is done passively, like people stereotype or exclude or whatever just by instinct, by reflex, because it's, what's normal in culture. And I think so because of that, like, in a way it's encouraging, because I don't think it's like everybody is intentionally writing things to, make women look bad or to be abusive or something. It's just that they hadn't thought about it, and hadn't really occurred to them they're doing that. And so, like, the more it's talked about, the more people start to notice that they're following these well-trod paths of how people are represented in fiction. Then the more they'll start to change that. Like, it applies to many different issues in writing, even non-social things. There's a certain thing, like when you're going to write a plot development, and then you think like, oh wait, that's kind of a cliche. Like, I've seen that 100 times before. How can I twist this around so that it's not so obvious, or like it's not following that path? And so, a lot of people don't bother with that step. They're just like, this is easy. This is what everyone knows and recognizes. So I'm just going to follow this formula. And, unfortunately, part of that formula is very sexist. So I think just like the more people are made aware of those like subliminal biases and things in the content, then the more the content will change, the more the actual fiction and geek content will evolve, and then that will draw more people into the field. Where I would imagine, if all the comic books, for instance, if they're all just about women being put in fridges, then not a lot of women are going to be like, I want to be a comic book writer or a fan for that matter. So like, as that opens up and kind of people realize that there's a demand, there's an interest in non-formulaic stories that allow different people to have voices, I would think that would attract more people into the medium, and then it would change even faster. So I don't know. That's off the top of my head. It's a large-scale societal question, and I'm not even really that deeply involved in that scene these days, even though like I do find myself at a lot of, I guess would be considered geek conventions. I'm not really like a super active participant in like video games or comic books or anything. So like, I'm kind of speculating somewhat from an armchair perspective here, but that's my theory as far as I've got one.
I mean, in recent years there have been efforts to include more female-driven stories, include more women in movie adaptations of geek properties, and there have been quite a lot of toxic blowback. I mean, the remake of Ghostbusters with all women, that was brutal. That was like, Sony released the trailer and oh my god, the comments box, do not even read the comics section. And then when Alamo Drafthouse just said, for Wonder Woman we're going to have a female only screening, just one, And then you get all these guys just protesting and saying it's sexist, and you know, the rest of us are sitting over here with like this, you know, face palming and going, that's just one showing, and you know, why are you so angry about this? You know, guys, why? So
yeah. I mean, I think that it's a culture that has a certain appeal. Like, not that it's not necessarily, you know, the old trope of it being like just geek stuff is for like antisocial weirdos. I don't think that's true, but I think it is, you know, for people who are kind of living in their own heads. It has a lot of appeal because it's, you know, it's fantasy and people go to it for escape sometimes. And so I think as a result of that, it does attract a certain element population that is not very well, like, is not out there living in the world and interacting with different people different than.
hello. Isaac? Hi, everybody. Can you see me, guys? Guys, can you see me? Yeah, I'm very, very sorry about that. It looks like Isaac has froze. I think his internet connection has dropped. So while we're waiting for Isaac to maybe come back, we'll wait for about 5 minutes. Just thank you all so much for being with us today. I am going to send Isaac another invitation. Hopefully he'll get it. It might be his internet connection. In the meantime, let's go to, I promised to tell you how to go get the Goodie Bundle that Isaac has so generously donated to us. So let's go to, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it. As mentioned earlier, Isaac has generously donated an exclusive book bundle to the stash of author goodies we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels fundraising page. So Isaac's bundle features 1 Warm Bodies paperback signed and personalized, 1 paperback of The New Hunger, also signed and personalized, and 1 copy of the Burning Wall first edition, signed and personalized. There's also some Warm Bodies bookmarks and a copy of M's journal, which is unpublished, and only 3 people have the story with them apart from Isaac, and so you'll be the 4th if you donate to get the bundle. So We've crossed the $4,000 milestone and are on our way to a $5,000 fundraising goal. And there are also plenty more author goodies available from authors including Adrian Tchaikovsky, Charles DeLint, Kendare Blake, Karen Rose, Vicky Patterson, and more. Now I'm going to share this Okay, guys. So can you guys see it? All right. Okay, guys. So if you want to donate and to get Isaac's bundle, or if you want to just donate whatever you can, and there are plenty of goodies, you can go to our page on Rally Up at is.gd/r4p Rally Up 2017. And if you want to learn more about Read for Pixels, go to http://is.gd/Read for Pixels. Oh, Isaac's back, everybody. Hang on. Isaac is back. Hey, Isaac. You there?
Am I back?
Yes, you're back.
Oh, yay.
Yeah, so everyone was
yeah,
it's
I don't know what's going on. It's super choppy still.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can't really hear you.
Can you hear me? Oh dear, Isaac.
Yeah, I can't really hear.
Oh dear. Come on, internet. Come on, internet.
I
Come
can't,
on.
yeah.
You can't
Can't hear it at all.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
I hear little.
We can all hear you.
There's some low quality internet here.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can now. Your face is not moving at all.
Okay, so let's try and wrap up.
Maybe it'll be better if I turn off the video.
Oh,
No.
yeah. Is it better now? Without a video on? Isaac?
No.
Can you hear me?
Maybe I can turn off your video.
No, I don't think you can turn on my video. Can you hear me?
I can hear you a little bit. Maybe it's coming back. It's still kind of choppy, but we might be able to. Are there more questions?
No, just one last one. Actually, I told the audience about where to go get your goodie bundle just now while we were waiting for you to come back in, and just a very Captain Obvious question, but we always wrap up with this question. So you have been so very incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work as a whole. You have been since the beginning. This is actually a second hangout with us. So why do you support the cause to end violence against women? And in your opinion, how can authors like yourself best support efforts to kick off social change to end violence against women?
Well, I mean, like you said it yourself, it's kind of a Captain Obvious question. But I mean, as far as why I support it, it's hard for me to imagine someone not supporting that idea. Although we did just have that guy in my Reddit AMA who apparently didn't support it. But I didn't really understand what his point was. I mean, it's just obviously a problem. It's, yes, there's violence against men, not good either. But, for obvious reasons, it's more of an issue against women, not only more common, but kind of like more horrifying, because in most cases it's not, it's a case of someone who is stronger or more powerful in some way, in someone who can't defend themselves, which is just the worst thing that can happen in life. So, you know, I don't really know if there needs to be a reason to support ending that. Like it's kind of, it is a no-brainer, and, you know, whatever can be done should be done. As far as, you know, an author's role, I think it's, you know, I guess there are probably some authors who would be in a position to like actually campaign for that cause, depending on, you know, what the nature of your writing is, what the nature of your fan base is, things like that. And I think there's different roles for different levels of activism. But on a basic level, in the writing itself, I mean, it's all the stuff that we've just talked about tonight. I think like the more that writers reflect reality in that way, and reflect an honest depiction of, you know, relationships between men and women and women and women and men and men, then it just will gradually filter into the culture at large. I think that, you know, people always want to say like, oh, it's just a movie, it's just a book. It's not, you know, why are we debating this? But like, that's been always seemed such a ridiculous argument to me, because it's like those things come from reality. It's like you look at a mirror and you see mud on your face. It's not like, oh, it's just a mirror, it doesn't matter, you know, we don't need to talk about it. It's just there's no, it's not really mud on my face, it's just a mirror. Like, yes, there is. It reflects what we're doing. So, you know, it's a cumulative effect. I mean, there are some writers who are writing very explicitly and directly about this issue, and then there are others who are weaving it in on a more subtle level into their stories. But as a whole, all of that works together to, you know, change culture, basically. I mean, life imitates art to a large degree, and it's all interconnected. So whatever kinds of stories we're telling, the ways that we're telling them, has a big impact on how people think and treat each other. So, you know, involving all of these concepts that we're talking about in the writing can have that effect. I think it's, you know, a very gradual and subtle movement, but I think it does make an impact. That's what I hope to do.
And you are doing it. I mean, like we said just now, your book has violence, but it doesn't, you know, you somehow twisted and subverted the zombie trope. So it's not violence against women, it's not gender-based violence, it's basically showing violence in a dystopian world affecting everybody. So in a weird way, there's some sort of weird equality in the warm bodies world where, you know, it truly is, you know, everybody gets affected by violence, and then the violence is perpetuated by, in this case, Axiom, which is the uber patriarchy.
It's kind of that's an interesting point that you mentioned, because like in a subtle way, it's not really like people living in this time aren't really thinking or talking about it, but like the apocalypse does have kind of a equalizing effect on society, where when civilization has been destroyed to this degree and like people are struggling to survive, there isn't a whole lot of room for, you know, nitpicking on who you like and who you don't like, and coming up with these like baseless prejudices about race or gender, things like that. It's in some ways it's kind of taken a back seat to like, we got to work together to survive. And so the society that's come out of that, I mean, one of the big themes in this story is like all this horrible stuff has happened, but like the little silver lining here is that it has kind of reset the cultural landscape. And now there's sort of an opportunity, like, do we latch onto that and move forward with that and try to like build a new society based on that? Or do we go back to the old ways? We bring back the old society, try to reestablish order as it was. And that's what Axiom is trying to do, is to, you know, get back to the way things were, which is the way things are now. And so, yeah, what you said.
Yeah, I really hope we don't need to reduce society to a rubble just to get there.
Yeah. I think this is kind of it's an exaggeration to make a point. I I did a local TED talk a couple years ago about this subject of like, what could you kind of learn from an apocalypse scenario? What could maybe be applied to the world as we know it now? Like, can you gain some of those benefits and learn some of those lessons without actually destroying everything? But I think there has to be an openness to letting things change in a drastic way. And we saw a lot of that resistance, like in the last election. There's kind of like people saying like, we got to change things in a big way. And then there's people like saying, no, we got to make America great again. We got to go back to what we used to be. And so those opposing views are running through everything, whether there's an actual apocalypse or not.
So we have to wrap up now. So I'm going to go tell everyone where to go get information about stopping violence against women. And don't go anywhere, Isaac. We'll buy together. Okay, so guys, so we've given you the link to go try and get Isaac's bundle. There's only one of that. So go to is.gd/R for P Rally Up 2017. That is case sensitive, so make sure you type it in correctly. But in the meantime, if you want to find out more about violence against women and what you can do about it, and violence against women includes everything from domestic violence, rape and sexual assault, to forced marriage, child marriage, female genital mutilation. There are plenty of primers and plenty of action checklists at the Pixel Project's website at www.thepixelproject.net. And once again, to find out more about the celebrity male role model pixel reveal campaign, please visit reveal.thepixelproject.net to learn more about it. And do donate generously to help us reveal pixels and raise the $1 million for the cause. So right now, Isaac, I'll put Isaac back on the screen because we are both going to say bye. So Isaac, any final message to everybody who's watching right now?
Oh, just thanks for showing up. It's been a stimulating conversation.
Yeah. So guys, thank you, and have a good day or good night wherever you are in the world. This is Regina signing out together with Isaac, and we hope to see you soon on our Facebook page. Thank you so much.
Bye.